Welcome to the Journal of Expressive Writing Open Mic. I'm Kelly Dumar, and I'm delighted to host this experience here for all of us tonight. One of the things that we need, I think, right now is the voice of Joy Harjo, the poet, who says that if the poem works, you are transformed. For the opening poem tonight, I've chosen a poem that I think is a real spiritual necessity for all of us at this time of the world. So please feel free, close your eyes if you want to listen without your eyes open, if you just want to take this poem in through your ears. I'm not going to be able to share a screen, but I do want you to just relax and listen. And this is Joy Harjo's poem for calling the spirit back from wandering the earth in its human feet. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth, gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers take many forms: animal, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor. Call your spirit back. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would to a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place else to go. Make a giveaway, and remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this: help the next person find their way through the dark. I felt that this experience of Joy Harjo's poem would be also a wonderful way to welcome Catherine Raven and her writing of Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship, to our open mic tonight. She is, F. Scott Fitzgerald says that is part of the beauty of all literature. You discover that your longings are universal longings, that you're not lonely and isolated from anyone. You belong. So Catherine Raven helps us look at belonging through friendship in such an involving way through her relationship with Fox that she talks about in Fox and I. And I want to introduce you to her now by telling you that, scrolling through my notes here, sorry. Okay, can't find that piece I wanted to read. No worries. Catherine Raven's quest for belonging, friendship, and home is a beautifully written memoir, but more than that, it's a beautifully written book about the biological sciences for an audience of non-scientists. She just received the Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. And the judges said about Catherine and Fox and I, with vividly detailed prose, Raven depicts a landscape humming with the vitality of tiny creatures, fragrant flowers, and danger. We are delighted to present the 2022 Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award to Catherine Raven for her eye-opening narrative of friendship and discovery. I'm scrolling through. I'm so sorry. I've lost your bio. This is so crazy. Okay, here it is. Looking in the wrong document. Sorry about that. About Catherine. Catherine Raven earned both her GED and her PhD in Bozeman, Montana. The latter from Montana State University in biology. She earned a BA in botany and zoology from the University of Montana. She's a member of Sigma Chi, a scientific honor society, and American Mensa, and a former National Park Ranger. Her natural history essays have appeared in American Scientist, Journal of American Mensa, Montana Magazine, National Geographic Traveler, and Narrative. Catherine won first place in the 2017 Montana Festival of the Book for nonfiction writing and was the 2019 Grand Prize winner for book-length nonfiction from the Faulkner Society. Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship, was written while Catherine worked full-time as a university professor. Catherine, we are so excited to welcome you here to read. Welcome. I'm asking you to unmute, and you are on.
Can you hear me now?
You can now.
Okie dokie. So I'm going to start with a short section from chapter 2. It's quite lyrical, and then I'm going to go into a longer section from later in the book. So I'll read 2 sections for the total, and I wanted you to get an idea of how I write about nature. There are very, very many different ways, but I'm really happy to see that it's doing well. It seems to be resonating with people, and thank you a million for coming. I'm really, really thrilled. I was a park ranger before I earned my doctorate in biology. In fact, I was pressing a Stetson on my head and cinching up that iconic pinecone embossed belt before I finished my bachelor's degree. I'd studied botany and zoology in college. In Washington's Mount Rainier National Park, I patrolled the backcountry. My trail circuit included a region known as 3 Lakes, where I stayed in a tiny cabin that smelled like wood and wax. A few feet shorter than my blue-roofed cottage, the 3 Lakes patrol cabin and its outhouse perched on a knoll above First Lake, the largest of the 3 lakes. Giant shaggy-barked evergreens surrounded and almost completely shaded the lake. I never called it First Lake. I treated all 3 lakes as a single body of water, temporarily separated by a transient meadow, and called it all 3 lakes, no matter which shore I stood on. Not many hikers trudged the 6 miles uphill to 3 Lakes from the nearest road. Even fewer came by way of the Pacific Crest Trail, a long journey that required camping overnight. Every morning, I rose from a sleeping deck that ran flush with the cabin's window and scratched myself into a uniform, 1 badge on the shirt and another on the jacket. Wearing a .357 in a shoulder holster, I hiked down to the lake with coffee in one hand and a government-issued logbook in the other. Across my green cloth logbook, in fat black cursive, I had written a quote from Ishmael, the narrator of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Meditation and water are wedded forever. For Ishmael, an impecunious sailor hustling jobs in Manhattan in the 1800s, meditation meant exactly what it meant to me at the Three Lakes cabin in the 20th century, pondering. If it had any other meaning, scholastic, formal, or religious, I wasn't any more aware of it than Ishmael would have been. Overall, our lot and luck didn't differ by much. We both found ways to keep wild animals and wild water nearby. Melville could have dropped Ishmael along the Shriner Peak Trail and let him join me on the 8-mile hike up the exposed ridge to the fire lookout. After surveying wildlife and hammering PVC pipes into snowbanks, we would haul jerry cans filled with meltwater back to the fire tower. In the evening, we would stand on the tower's railed balcony to admire our priceless view of Mount Rainier and never mind the 1,000 miles or the 150 years that separated us. The same thought would cross our minds. An 8-mile hike, no better view in the Northwest, asked less of a person. After a night at the lookout, we would follow Laughing Water Creek through old-growth forest, using Leatherman tools and pruning paint to repair graffiti that scalawags had carved into the thin gray bark of silver firs. Laughing Water Creek traces the park's border around the rim of the Three Lakes Basin, so we would have to check on boundary signs. Pausing periodically at the white metal signs with green embossed letters, one of us would slip the reverse end of a claw hammer under a double-headed nail and pull, just enough to prevent the sign from eating into the bark of a boundary tree. We wouldn't mind the workload. We were outdoors, away from civilization, free from anxiety. An impecunious sailor in Manhattan in 1800 expressed anxiety by deliberately stepping into the streets and methodically knocking people's hats off. To a backcountry ranger in the 20th century, anxiety meant turning into mercury, a metal that evaporates in ambient temperatures, becoming invisible, odorless, and completely unassuming. And now, before you ask any questions, I'm going to start a longer section, which is from the middle of the book. And this is after Fox and I have become friends, and I'm working on a textbook. And there's a little bit of a conflict in my relationship with Fox because I know all about anthropomorphism and that it's kind of a taboo. And so I'm worried about my relationship with Fox. The words that you might not know in this section, I will call, I say Saint X as the author of The Little Prince. If you speak French, you'll know how to say that in a way that I don't. So I just write Saint X in the book. And I also refer to the Rainbow Room, and that's the upstairs of my little cottage. All of the windows that I'm surrounded by have shades on them, a different color of the rainbow. It's explained in the book. And I got to get a picture of that on Twitter one of these nights. In the evening, when you stand outside my house and I have lights inside the house, you can see the rainbow all the way around. It's quite gorgeous. So that's what the Rainbow Room means. And I talk about a VE-24, which is a tent, my prized possession in those days. It's a VE-24, meaning it's a two-man, it's a two-door, four-man tent or woman tent, as it might be. And then one other thing you might not know if you didn't read the book is that Fox is mute. So he makes a little bit of an odd sound, which I describe as the last gasp of a dying duck. It sounds like he almost would say quack if he could, but he can't. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if you have the book, this is the beginning of the chapter, Elk and Badgers. Late April, I dragged storage bins out of the shed, swapping till mid-September heavy winter clothes like double-layered wool balaclavas, bibbed ski pants, goose-down mittens, and lined gaiters for light winter clothes like lined canvas overalls, wool ball caps, chopper mitts, and unlined gaiters. I could have pretended that 4 seasons visited me, but living and dressing for 2 seasons, like the Fox, was simpler. You might think people would seek out gentler landscapes, places tucked into cozy climates. White sand beaches sprayed between blue water and artistically arranged greenery come to mind. St. X didn't agree. He'd spent enough time in deserts to figure out that men attach themselves more stubbornly to barren lands than to any other. In graduate school, I worked with DNA, a molecule that shaped somewhat like a ladder. I inserted dye molecules between the rungs to make it easier to see. This procedure is called intercalating. The dye doesn't fit well. Edges bulge out, gaps form between DNA and dye. In comforting habitats, humans can enmesh themselves, snuggle in, and fit securely. But in harsh climates, all we can do is intercalate. The stress of this imperfect fit keeps our adrenaline surging. St. X and his fellow pilots scoped out some of the most popular and populated habits on Earth. And yet, in the world's harshest places, they found joy that they could not possibly know elsewhere. I'm pretty sure that joy is an emotion primed by adrenaline. Like St. X's precious Sahara, the desert-like land Fox and I inhabited was prone to vicious windstorms and amassed only 10 inches of precipitation each year. Cold and elevated, though not nearly as dry as a true cold desert like the Gobi, our semi-desert frosted over at least once a day from early September through mid-May. Quite a bit of snow fell, but most of it was too dry to ease a dogged drought. You might wring only 1 inch of water from 50 inches of our driest snow. Wind tossed the dry snow, rearranging it in reckless patterns and leaving behind parched, frozen dirt, icy shelves, and waist-high drifts. Clay soil with an embarrassingly high pH hid underneath the snow. Because water couldn't percolate through wet clay or soak into dry clay, plants and tree roots were either desiccating or drowning. Very few plants grew in our alkaline clay, and almost none that did enjoyed themselves. Before I met the Fox, I was planning my escape. Everything I've never had, a home, a credit card, an age and gender appropriate job, was waving at me from some imagined city. The cottage was meant to be a way station, somewhere to wait while I tugged on society's skirt and hoisted myself from the wilderness to the real world. I still slept inside a sleeping bag, and like my backcountry cabins, the cottage was small. If I removed all the furniture and shut every door, 6 VE24 tents could squeeze inside, 4 in the rainbow room and 2 below. After repacking clothes, I sorted old documents into storage bins, dropping university contracts, pay stubs, bills, and anything with my Social Security number into a bleach bath. Another day, I trekked 15 miles round trip to offload the incriminating paper mache into green boxes. That's our valley's euphemism for dump site, because I didn't know that thieves wouldn't steal the identity of one of the only adults in America who didn't own a credit card or a debit card. Behind the cottage, wheatgrass was doing what it usually did.
Recording in progress.
Oops. Is everything okay? Is everything okay?
Everything is great. I'm so sorry.
Oh.
I don't know why that went off again.
Oh,
but
okie dokie,
it's
sorry.
good.
Behind the cottage, wheatgrass was doing what it usually did on windy days, surging up the North Hills like waves in a shallow sea. Pointing my face sunward and closing my eyes, I waited, but not a fine hair stirred. The waves of grass rippled, turning into sheets of elk. Scores of shaggy brown necks undulated against the blue sky. The elk herd would be winter stressed and include tired, pregnant cows. Unless someone was chasing them, elk in that condition were no more likely than an ocean to flow 300 feet uphill. I listened for dogs barking or baying, checked the sky for eagles. Nothing. The silence suggested mountain lion. Mountain lion? No. Big cats were too pragmatic to waste energy running hundreds of shaggy beasts uphill. In fact, I couldn't imagine any wild animal frivolous enough to be droving elk. He poked his tail up. Fox? One fox, surrounded by 100 Rocky Mountain elk, each adult outweighing him by a quarter ton. Are you insane? Do you know what an elk weighs? I always used rhetorical questions because Fox couldn't reply. About a dozen strides brought him within 2 meters of me, and he stopped. What? He had heard me speak on at least 380 separate days, usually for extended periods during our simulated conversations, and today, with a curtain of elk legs separating us, he recognized my voice for the first time. I picked up a white egg shake Brock, sat on the back steps, and let our milestone moment sink in. He was now on the very short list of individuals who recognized my voice. I had known for a long while that Fox recognized my appearance. He came around whenever I walked down the driveway or through the North Meadow, and I made myself large and conspicuous by waving my arms overhead. He wasn't just coming towards someone he recognized as a person. On 5 occasions, he ran away from people crossing my property. 4 of them my size, 3 of them females, none of them me. Because Fox made it his business to investigate all the goings-on in his territory, anytime I suspected he was nearby, I made a little commotion by tapping a brownie-sized rock on the wooden front steps. And if he was close enough to hear, he came around. I'd always thought I was tricking him. Now that I'm shedding more of my biases about his cognitive ability, I'm thinking that he was coming around for a game of hide the egg. He twisted his torso and he gazed up at the previously bald hill, now sporting a thick crew cut of brown, upright elk necks. Long elk faces turned in unison and gawked at us. A year had passed since I started reading with Fox. He had become braver without getting any bigger. He used to be frightened by a single mule deer buck, and now he was driving elk. Maybe friendship had emboldened him. I wondered if that was what friendship was supposed to do. Fox was rubbing his neck through a stand of photogenic wild rye. Braided seed heads darted a couple of feet over his head, creating the perfect picture for a textbook photo. Instead of running for the camera, I waited. All the other photos I had of Fox assimilated themselves into my life as though he were family. A leather-bound folder with 2 photos stood open on the bookshelf. Magnetized frames attached Fox's image to the fridge and heater, and 2 14 by 16-inch wood-framed matte prints hung above the cedar chest in the Prairie Rose room. Stealing shots for a textbook felt unnatural. Would you take someone's photo without asking permission? Would you do it if that someone were a friend? In the year that had passed since I'd started reading with Fox, I had become more sensitive to his feelings without getting more sentimental. And the photo's caption, there would have to be a caption. What would it say? Here's Fox. Posing for photographers was never Fox's plan, and foxes, by nature, were planners. That's why a Scottish poet likened man's ability to lay plans with that of mice and not foxes. And that's why same poet noted that our best laid plans, and not those of foxes, sometimes go astray. Using Fox for sidebar photos in a textbook gave me an alibi for spending time with him every day. It was the one part of my life that was going according to plan. Of course, a bad plan realized is worse luck than a good plan foiled. Now I needed another photo for my textbook, which would be easy to find, and a new alibi, which would not. When I first met Fox, he enjoyed more hobbies than I did. I spent more time working for and worrying about food and shelter than he did. Instead of hobbies, my free time belonged to unfinished applications for real jobs that I didn't want to pursue in places that I didn't want to live. My hobby had been worrying. I worried about what I wanted to be now that I was a grown-up. I worried about where to make a real home now that I had overstayed the acceptable amount of time that one should domicile a way station. The more time I spent watching Fox, the less I worried. As long as he lived here, I wasn't going to move away. I headed down to a scattered series of boulders and motley arrangements of holes to see if the old badger had sprung any more little ones out this year. Last spring, one young badger had pushed his fluffy head out of the den hole and rumbled like an erupting volcano. Its tiny body would have fit inside my hand, but the clever little animal, a member of the weasel family, didn't reveal any more than his head. I suppose anyone who didn't know that a young badger's body was just a ball of fluff would judge the creature according to its enormous ears, wingnut-shaped head, and ground-shaking roar to be an underground troll. But if you knew it was harmless, you would instead notice that its navy blue eyes were too big for its face, and its smile turned down like that of a sad old man. Despite the droll face and their friendly demeanor, most everybody chooses to live where oversized weasels are not carving dusty holes the length of size 9 shoes into their lawn. Those of us who have barnacled ourselves to inhospitable places may be trying to avoid people, not because we do not like people, but because we love the things that people destroyed. Wild things, horizons, trolls. Okie dokie. Thank you.
Oh my goodness.
Well, thanks for
Fabulous.
listening. I'm very happy to listen to Kelly's questions now.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I laughed and I cried. You know, I teared up. I mean, this statement you make about maybe friendship had emboldened him, you know, it's such a beautiful idea for interspecies friendship, as well as just our friendships with each other. And gorgeous prose. Your risk is our reward. It's such daring, I think, to be living out in the wilderness and exploring these relationships. I think I find it really, really fascinating, moving, and the idea terrifies me of being as isolated as you are, and yet, and so this quest, this map you've given us is so wonderfully engaging. I listened to it, by the way, on Audible, and loved that experience. I just want to mention, because it's available, of course. I put in the chat room where it's available, but I also listened to Stacy Glemboski on Audible reading it. But it was also more delightful to hear it in your voice tonight, although I think the Audible recording is really excellent.
It's gotten a lot of compliments. We listened to a lot of people before I chose Stacy, and I really loved the fact that she wasn't that serious, that nature voice that's trying to pretend like it's God or Mother Nature. You know, the spring comes late in the Rocky Mountains. And I just loved that she was spry and young and happy in all the right places. Yes, she did.
It's hard to pick an alter ego of voice. You did a fine job, and it was riveting. I couldn't stop listening. Now, there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. And I noticed there was, first of all, one question in the chat room had to do with, is that Fox behind you in the pictures?
Oh yeah, that's him. Oh, there he is. Oh, you can see that picture. Oh, that's him.
Yeah. And the one above it?
Yeah. Yes. He's everywhere. And yes, I'm upstairs in the Rainbow Room, but yes, there's pictures of him everywhere. Mm-hmm.
Upstairs in the Rainbow Room. So one of my questions was, because you mentioned before I met the Fox, I planned my escape. And so clearly you did not leave. You stayed.
I'm still here.
And you're still there. So we're actually seeing you and hearing you from your home in Montana.
Yes.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
right. I have.
I feel like I've entered the sacred space to know this. This is very exciting to me, because I just love the description of the building of the cabin and your own relationship of what your vision was for the cabin. Maybe you just say a tiny bit about that, just your vision for planning a little bit of what is this dwelling that you were building? What was your vision?
It's a lot like a fire tower. I never worked as a fire lookout, but I did supervise some fire lookouts when I was at North Cascades. And so I'd spend a lot of time in fire lookouts, and they're little, and the section I read from chapter 2, when I was at Mount Rainier, there was no fire lookout at Shriner. So I was responsible for that as well. And they're square buildings, and they're all glass, but I wanted glass all the way around so that I wouldn't feel claustrophobic, which is a really big problem. You should know, I forget this because it's so obvious to me, but I have no closets in the house. I have an armoire downstairs, but that's how much I am claustrophobic. I mean, there are no separate rooms with doors that close. The bathroom has a door, but since I've always lived alone, I don't think it's ever been closed. So there's a bathroom door and it's always open. So there's just one room upstairs and one room downstairs, and it's all very much open. And the windows are all odd different distances from each other, which seemed normal to me. The contractor, charged a little bit of extra money. And he said, this is crazy. The windows are supposed to be evenly spaced apart. And I said, I want to see this peak and this peak and this peak and this peak and this peak, from here. And he said, you're surrounded by mountains. Every window, but he came from the town site 30 miles away, a town of like 300 people. And he didn't realize that I wanted to be in one spot right here where I can see these mountain peaks. And so the windows had to be unevenly spaced. I found out that Robert Reamer, who designed the Old Faithful Inn in 1902, did the same thing when he designed the Old Faithful Inn. And it was a big fuss then too. He said that nature isn't even. And so he was going to build a building that didn't have windows that were all evenly. And they're just thrown up all over the building wherever he felt like throwing them. And here it is, still difficult to get a contractor to put windows willy-nilly, as he probably thought.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for those wonderful insights. So one of the central conflicts, particularly, and there are a number of them, but particularly in the beginning, the early parts of the memoir, is this idea of the taboo that you mentioned, this anthropomorphism, which as poets and creative writers, personifying animals and the voices of animals, I mean, that can create wonderful, beautiful poetry and prose and using our imaginations in that way. But this is a taboo in science writing. And I would just love to have it, because I sense that you're a determined woman. You have this strong vision about what you need, what you want, and that your acceptance of rules is maybe you've got a low tolerance for accepting rules, right? And so, but on the same hand, I got this.
I don't understand them. That's probably
okay. So, but you did understand and struggle with the question about being a naturalistic observer and then also writing about this really interesting friendship that was developing. And maybe you could just say a little bit more about the feelings or the thoughts you had about breaking this taboo.
That's really important, of course, because it's a huge part of the book. And that's why I was so thrilled to get the E.O. Wilson Award, because I adore E.O. Wilson and have for decades. And to get that award when I broke this taboo meant a lot. But you read a poem at the beginning of, so I have to say something about your poem, which ties
Joy Harjo's poem, but yes.
Joy Harjo's poem. There was an essay in the New York Times this last week and about anthropomorphism, and one scientist was interviewed who doesn't think that it's a terrible thing, but then they interviewed one other scientist who made rude comments and basically said, you're a nitwit and an idiot if you think that an animal has a personality. And my publisher sent me that link, and I wrote back to her and said, well, if so-and-so, the scientist who made that comment that he doesn't believe that animals have personality, if he also doesn't believe that when we're in the world, we can hear and we are called by, and there are spirits that exist before the here and now and exist after. If he doesn't believe that, then I don't care what he says about anthropomorphism. And in your poem, I noticed that Jo Harjo said the same thing as she's walking. She says, there's a before a now, and there's an after a now. So it's very, some people just don't believe that. They only believe what they can see in front of them, what they can touch and feel. And if that's the case, then you're never going to accept anthropomorphism. Probably in my lifetime, you're always going to say there's no proof, that there's no proof. And so until we have dissected brains of these animals and figured out exactly which genes are responsible for this thought and this thought and this thought, and we've got all these electrodes in their heads and we've done all these experiments, until we're done with that, we're just going to say, no, animals don't have personalities. But I realized after I'd known Fox for a very long time that science, it sheds this great, bright light on the world. And we wouldn't have this, we wouldn't have vaccines if it wasn't for science. It's just a wonderful bright light, but it's such a narrow beam. And there's too much of the world that you cannot see if all you see is what science can illuminate. Then I miss the rest of the world. And I want my students, who are all non-majors in biology, I want my students to understand that you have to have something else to look at the world. You have to have your instincts. You have to have your human nature. It goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And our nature, our human nature, if we allow it, will allow us to interpret the world. And we'll see that foxes were meant to follow us hand in hand, paw by foot, as we travel. They were absolutely meant to be our friends. There's so much of that, of his personality, that was so obvious to me once I realized that you have to open up yourself to the world and not just feel like nothing that you can't see and nothing that isn't proven can possibly exist.
Well, the world of the fox's behavior, and so many other aspects of nature are so acutely observed and beautifully described in your book. So I can understand why you're getting these awards for beautiful science writing. Someone asked a question, about, do you ever get lonely out there? I think you've sort of answered it, but maybe, Rainy, let's see, sorry, I forgot. Asked that question about, do you ever get lonely out there?
I probably would be lonely if all of the animals and plants disappeared. But I don't think, and some, there have been some, there's a fox back now. I've had my spy camera out for over a month, and I'm calling it a she. I think it's a female because she stayed, the mating season is long past since Valentine's Day, and she's still here, and she comes by every day, and she's marked her territory, my territory, and I think it's a female. She's here, and I have skunks here all the time, and badgers. Raccoon showed up last summer, but also the plants feel very homey to me. And when I go outside in the morning, no matter what the temperature or weather is, and if it's way below zero, I'm not outside very long, but I see things and I feel like they're part of my community, whether it's the little bits of grasses or the tree. And I just check on everybody to see how everybody's doing. And I feel like they're kind of checking on me too. Yeah. I think the birds and the foxes feel the same way. They feel like that's their community, and it's my community. So I don't feel lonely. But of course, if you're in a place that's just a city, then I think I would be very lonely. But feeling so close to other animals, to non-human animals, is really necessary for me to keep me from being lonely. And again, I don't feel like nature is a mother. Nature is a community. And it's our birthright, right? We're born into that community. So they can't like turn their nose up at us and shoo us out and knock us down and make fun of us because we belong from birth into that community. So you don't have to worry about fitting in. It's great.
There's a couple of other questions that are coming in, and we're not going to have time to take all of them, but here's a probably easy, quick one to answer. Do you have any house pets, like a cat or a dog or a bird?
No. And I think there are 2 cats coming around now. It's really influenced that fox's behavior. I can see that on my spy camera. I probably would have gotten a dog if I had decided to stay here, if it hadn't been for the fox, but I can't imagine that I would have stayed here if it wasn't for the fox. I certainly would have left and moved to a city, and then I would have had a dog, of course. But once I met the fox and spent so many years with him, I realized that the only reason why he came onto my property, well, of course, there were voles here, but if I had had a dog, he never would have come around. I mean, they absolutely don't like dogs, and they hate foxes, and cats are just absolute, complete enemies. So.
Well, I want to just bring it back probably to wrap up question about the memoir, really, and your writing life. I guess the question has to do with interested in the writing life before your memoir, and maybe where your writing life is now, perhaps after the memoir. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the memoir was really written little bits and pieces here and there and here and there because I was working so much. And what's happened, partially because of COVID, I have less work to do in my field classes in the summer. But also because I have more self-esteem about my ability to write. And that's made a really big difference. And so I put my writing front and center now. And that's really important to me. And I have blocks of time that I spend writing. And I still teach, but I'm teaching less, and I'm writing more. And I'm doing, instead of having my students on my mind 24 hours a day, I have my book, my next book, the novel that I'm working on my mind all day long. And then I have chunks of time that for example, after this program, I just focus on my students. So they're more compartmentalized, and writing has become more important to me. And by the way, the novel is the same themes as Fox and I. It still gives voice to non-human animals, and nature really is and setting is a really important character in the book.
So now you're really going into imaginative territory, into fiction. This is really fascinating. So that's really wonderful to know. And I do want to encourage people to go to your website. I'll put the link into your website again, but I did put it in if you scroll up into the chat room, but I will make sure that gets put in again, as well as the link to purchasing your book. But I want to underscore, it seems worthy of underscoring this concept of your self-esteem about your writing is better now. I mean, it's better, it's more improved, having written the memoir, which is such an interesting idea, because I think a lot of people, well, I can't publish a book until I get my self-esteem about my writing. So it sounds like, I kind of want to ask you, what was the big takeaway for you of writing the memoir? But it sounds like one of the big takeaways was just this validation about your writing, which is really now something that you feel even more committed to.
Yes, absolutely. It's just, the response has been really amazing. And I always imagined that there'd be some little girl up in the isolated mountains in Pakistan who would really love my book. But I didn't think that Americans would really want to read a book about somebody so isolated.
Oh.
And living so close to wildlife in this odd way. And when the next generation of gals who are maybe 20 now, it might seem more normal to them, but people my age and close to my age and older than me, it's so weird to not have any children, to never have had a permanent partner, to never have lived with anyone. And that's just considered very odd. And it seems like people want to read books about married people and families and relationships and people that live in cities, because that's where most people live, is in cities, and there aren't any car chases in my book.
Better than car chases. Catherine, I'm just like so touched and moved that we have been into the Rainbow Room and that we have been to Montana. We're there with you now. I know that there's been a lot of conversation. I know you'll get a chance to relax a little bit and read in the chat room. And maybe if you have a chance, you can answer a couple of questions there if you're up to it. And I hope that everyone will follow Catherine in every way that you can. I know, Catherine, you're on Twitter. Maybe we'll put your Twitter link in to the chat room as well. And make sure you buy the book if you haven't. And that link is in the chat room. And we're going to move to the open mic now.
Oh, yes,
And
I can hear you guys.
and hear, that's right, all the other creative writing that is here tonight. And thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I'm thrilled to be here, and you can ask me questions from my webpage.
Okay, great. From your webpage. Good. Okay, that is good to know. All right. So now I'm going to stop the recording.